Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I'm going to be doing my preview for the 2025 Mexico City Grand Prix. So first, taking a look at your track layout, of course at the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez. Sorry for butchering the Spanish there, try my best. But first, like I said, taking a look at the circuit layout. So sector 1, you basically have two long straights with the basically turn 1, 2, 3 kind of a chicane. Turn 1 generally is the best overtaking zone around this lap. Of course, very long DRS zones going from turn 17, the final corner, all the way into turn 1. And then, of course, sometimes you can get a move back going on the second straight from turns 3 to 4 as well. Then you get to Sector 2, where not really a whole lot of overtaking opportunities. You have the 4-5, like I said, and again, you can kind of overtake into there. Turn 6, not an overtaking zone, unless you're Daniel Ricciardo. I think he tried to do that, 2022, I believe it was. And then you get into the S's, turn 7 through to turn 11, single file racing through there, and then another DRS zone into turn 12. Kind of pointless to have a DRS zone there, just because it's impossible to follow through the S's. And that straight's way too short. And then, of course, Sector 3 is your stadium section, one of the most famous parts of an F1 track on the F1 calendar, I would say. A lot of really slow corners through there, makes following very difficult, and again, makes it really hard to set up a pass the following lap at turn 1. Now, the track itself, it's known for being at very, very high elevation, the highest elevation on the calendar, which means the air is thinner. And the one line that you'll hear throughout the weekend is that the teams have to run Monaco level downforce to achieve. Let's see, how do I get this right? They have to run Monaco spec wings on the front and the rear wings to achieve Monza level downforce. And again, something that the commentators will probably say about half a dozen times throughout the weekend, and you definitely get tired of it after hearing it a handful of times. So as a result, it means that dirty air is a lot worse here, and it's a bit of a unique layout as well. And that dirty air makes following really difficult, and because of just the environment that it's in a very big city, the track tends to be quite dusty, dirty offline, and that also makes it very hard to overtake cars around here. So this is going to be a track where qualifying is going to be very, very important. Now, looking at some stats about the circuit, 4.304 kilometers in length, and we're expected to have 71 laps of racing on Sunday. The race lap record is a 1:17.774 set by Valtteri Bottas 2021. Off chance that gets broken this year, but I think probably too many slow corners here, and I think around those kinds of slow corners, the 2021 cars are still faster than what we have today. Now, the average speed of that lap is 199 kilometers an hour, which is one of the slower ones on the calendar, ranks 22nd of the 24 tracks. Now, for downforce rating 0.8, so one of the higher downforce tracks on the calendar. Like I said before, even though my calculation doesn't even take altitude into effect, still came out with a very, very high downforce rating. Now, full throttle, track is full throttle for about 45% of the lap, so again, less than 50%. A lot of those S's are kind of off throttle, and then, of course, you have a lot of Sector 3 as well. And corner tendency, of course, is slow, a lot of very, very slow corners, the stadium section, and then kind of the start of Sector 2 in particular. Now, pole to win percentage is 44% here. In the past, not the last couple years, but I think definitely the kind of during the early turbo hybrid era, when this race kind of first returned to the calendar after being off for about 15 years or so, it was very, very common for the car in third place to have one of the best chances of getting into first place off the line, just because of how strong the toe is, because there's a really, really big distance between the starting grid and the first corner. So it means the toe can be very, very powerful, just like it was at the old Sochi's circuit. So again, this is a track where if you get a really, really good start, it's possible that the car in third place might actually be able to get around the two cars on the front row and ends up in the lead at the first corner. So it'll be interesting to see if we have kind of any kind of shenanigans, if we have a repeat of 2023, where of course Perez is basically kind of went airborne and basically ruined any hopes of having any kind of home win at his home race like he did that year. Rookie out qualifying percentage. This is kind of an interesting one. So despite the fact that this is a track where F1 teams generally will use this race as one of the ones that they give aside to one of their rookie drivers to fulfill the rookie free practice requirements. This is a track where it's historically been very, very difficult for rookies to out-qualify their teammates. Only 15% of the time it happens, which ranks 22nd of the 24 calendars. And I think the only two below it have very, very small sample sizes. So it's, in fact, actually one of the harder ones just to for rookies to qualify their teammates. Mostly, my guess would be that it's really down to the fact that it's a really unique circuit. It's very low grip, very dusty, and again, it's kind of a weird layer where you have to run really high downforce, and you still feel like you don't feel like you have the downforce that you're supposed to have. Now, safety car percentage is 56%, which again is about about average, I would say, for a purpose-built circuit. And again, we'll see if we have one this year. We haven't had a safety car that often recently, so again, it feels like we're kind of due for one. Now, first race at this circuit was 1963. That's the first F1 race. They did have non-championship Grand Prix before that, and again, this is a track that's been on and off the calendar for many years now, and it feels like, I think the current contract goes to 2028, I believe it is, and this is it's a track that feels like it's kind of been on the verge of kind of potentially dropping out off the calendar. I think if Perez did not come back for next year, then I think there's a possibility, or when Perez eventually does retire for good, I think there's a possibility that we may actually end up losing this track, which I think for the wheel-to-wheel racing I wouldn't be totally against, just because it generally hasn't produced great races, but obviously the fans and the atmosphere is pretty special, so that's, I guess, a decent reason to keep it on. Now, looking at the tires for this weekend, we're going to have the soft C5, medium C4, and the hard C2. So similar to what we had last time in Austin, we have a gap between the medium and the hard. And given what we saw last time, my guess is teams are just going to do a C5, C4 one-stop, and the C2 is going to be too hard and it's going to be useless. I wouldn't be surprised if that was what happened, just because overtaking is so hard here, and it's pretty much always been a guaranteed one-stop this race last several years. So, taking a look at your weekend schedule, no sprint, of course, this weekend, but we are, do have sprint every other weekend from now until the end of the season, or every other race, I should say. So, taking a look at the schedule for Friday. So, FP1, 12:30 in the afternoon, and then FP2 at 4 p.m. Expected temperature for FP2 is 25 degrees and sunny. Saturday, FP3 at 11:30 in the morning, followed by qualifying at 3, with expected temperature 26 degrees and sunny. And then we get to Sunday, Grand Prix at 2 p.m. sharp, and the expected temperature for the start of the Grand Prix is 26 degrees and sunny. So temperature is a little bit cooler than we saw last time in Austin. I would still say pretty warm. It doesn't look like there's going to be any chance of rain. I don't think it's ever rained in Mexico during the Grand Prix weekend. Might have, maybe for a free practice session, might have once or twice, but at least in the Grand Prix, I don't think we've ever had a wet Grand Prix. So temperatures look pretty stable, so I guess engineers will be happy on that front. And I would say track temperatures may not be too high, so again, this might not favor McLaren as much as Austin, in theory, should have favored them with the really, really high track temperatures. Now, taking a look at last year's race, this was, of course, won by Carlos Sainz and Ferrari, Sainz's last Grand Prix win to date. Rounding out the podium was Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc. So, first corner, we had a bit of a big incident between Albon and Tsunoda basically crashing into the wall and basically getting knocked out of the Grand Prix on the opening lap. About 10 laps into the Grand Prix, Verstappen, who I believe had started P2, was really struggling to keep Lando Norris behind him, of course, at this point, who is his main championship rival, and basically employing much the same strategy as he did last time, of course, referring to Austin 2024, not this year, but last year, of course. Verstappen's strategy was really trying to make sure that Norris scored as few points as possible, and again, some pretty aggressive maneuvers by Verstappen this race, both I think at turn 4, and then of course through the S's as well, to basically just push Norris off track and basically not let him overtake him, and both of them ended up getting overtaken by Charles Leclerc, and Verstappen was later given 2 10-second penalties for this. For those moves, and I think drawing quite a bit of ire from most general commentators. For Sergio Perez and the other Red Bull, it was a pretty disastrous home race. He got a false start, so that did not help matters for one. And then, of course, during the Grand Prix, he ended up tangling with Liam Lawson and ended up eventually finishing last on the road at his home Grand Prix. So pretty disastrous race for Perez. Hopefully, Tsunoda can do a bit better this year. Also, later in the Grand Prix, of course, Leclerc in P2, of course, after being kind of let by Verstappen, trying to hold Norris behind. He had a bit of a mistake at the final corner, ran wide, and that allowed Norris to seal up that second spot on the podium. And then, of course, before we get to the end of the Grand Prix, the last big incident was between a bit of a contact between Colapinto and Lawson, and that resulted in a 10-second penalty for the Argentinian. And of course, Carlos Sainz came home for the win. Pretty uneventful race for him, pretty straightforward. And again, I think obviously, given how close it was to the end of the season, very, very likely that it was his last race win with Ferrari, which of course ended up being. So again, definitely took the time to celebrate, I'm sure Carlos Sainz did. Now, taking a look at best qualifiers and worst qualifiers from this track historically, your three best qualifiers compared to their career averages are number 1, Carlos Sainz. Not a surprise, he won the race last year, plus 10% compared to his career average, with a median qualifying gap of 76 hundredths of a second. Number 2 is Max Verstappen, also plus 10%, median qualifying gap of 1.6 tenths of a second. And number 3 is Fernando Alonso, plus 8%, median qualifying gap of 1.26 tenths. 1.26 tenths of a second. Now, looking at your worst qualifiers, number 1 is actually Lando Norris, negative 31%. He's only out-qualified a teammate twice out of 5 occasions here. A couple of those, I think, were a bit iffy in the sense that they weren't super representative of, I think, the pace differential between Norris and his teammates at the time. But nonetheless, unfortunately, I kind of have to go with the stats as they are and hope that they eventually, kind of return to the mean over time. But for Norris, median qualifying gap of a positive 0.3 of a second. Then we get to number 2, Charles Leclerc, negative 15%, median qualifying gap of a positive 0.5 thousandths of a second. And then number 3 is Pierre Gasly, negative 13%, median qualifying gap of 26 hundredths of a second in his favor. Now, looking at your quality model predictions, basically I think the exact same, 9 of the 10 drivers is the same from last time in Austin. The only change is now Piastri is predicted to out-qualify Norris, and that of course is down to the fact that Norris has a pretty bad record here historically. But then again, Piastri also has a pretty bad record here. I think he finished 8th in both Grand Prix, and the 1 year he finished 10th. He started 10 places ahead of Norris, but still finished behind him on the road. So, historically not been a great track for Piastri. So, to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if Norris did end up out-qualifying, just because the stats for him are a little bit unrepresentative. So, taking a look, finishing up with some predictions for the Grand Prix. I think, given that what we've seen the last 4 to 5 races, I think Max Verstappen in excellent form. This is a track historically he's really good at. I think he honestly should be the favorite for the win, so I'm going to predict him for the win here. Number 2, I am going to go with Lando Norris. I think he's generally been pretty good recently. I think he's obviously had a little bit of misfortune, like getting taken out of the sprint. And I think this is a track where I think qualifying is going to be really important, so it's honestly entirely possible, for example, if both McLaren struggle in qualifying, that neither of them could be on the podium, which could just be more good news for Verstappen in his championship charge. But I do think, Norris should be able to, at least between qualifying well and having really strong race pace, I think Norris should be able to end up in the podium. For number 3, I generally have been pretty conservative with my predictions this year, and usually I've just predicted, both McLarens on the podium, and then usually Verstappen, Leclerc, or Norris, or Verstappen, Leclerc, or Russell, I should say. But given how poor Piastri's record is here, especially in the Grand Prix, and given his recent form in the last 4 to 5 races, I'm actually not going to predict Piastri on the podium, and instead I'm going to predict George Russell. It feels like we're time for a good result for the Brit. I think between him and Leclerc, it's probably really, really close, and we're not really sure who's going to be best on the circuit this weekend, just because the two teams have been so inconsistent, so unpredictable and they haven't really fit into the nice kind of standard parameters like high downforce, low downforce, front limited, rear limited. That way, usually it's somewhat easy to predict, which teams are going to be stronger than which. But I think for the Mercedes and the Ferrari, there's both, quite inconsistent. It's quite hard to predict who's going to be best between the two of them. But I feel like, Russell has been on a very, very strong run of form. This is not a particularly strong circuit for Leclerc. So I think decent prediction to put Russell on the podium instead of him. So there you go. That is my preview and my predictions for the 2025 Mexico City Grand Prix. Definitely looking forward to the race in terms of the championship battle. It'll be really, really interesting to see how this develops. Another really big weekend for Verstappen could put him in, quite not necessarily within striking distance of taking the lead in the championship, but another really, really big weekend could make things a lot more realistic and so on. So anyway, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.